My father was a very proud man. And it's important to understand him, to understand this story. He came from a different era, an era where men were expected to be strong and not show weakness. And to some extent, I inherited some of that. I'll come inside from being outside and I'll be bleeding down my arm. And the person says, "How'd that happen?" I said, "What?" Didn't even know. He would sprain his ankle and then just walk on it because he didn't want to be a sissy. But most importantly, he was unwilling to ever accept that he was wrong. This man once got into an hour-long conversation with my ex-wife about the finer aspects of breastfeeding. Now, bear in mind, at the time, not only was my ex-wife a La Leche League leader and a lactation educator, she had breastfed 2 children. And after an hour, I said, "Dad, you lose." And he walked away mumbling, "I don't know about that. I don't know." He never wanted to accept that he was wrong. And that's very important to this story. The setting of the story, I'm coming home after a long night at a coffee shop. It's probably 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I pull into our driveway, and I know that there's something wrong immediately because my mom is outside smoking. That's not unusual, but she's smoking like she's trying to inhale the cigarettes, number one. And number two, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning and my mother is awake. And that never happened. And she sees me and she locks eyes with me and then she goes immediately inside. So I quickly get out of the car to go to try and find out what's wrong. And my father meets me at the door and says, "Sit the fuck down." My father never swore. So I knew there was a big, big problem. So I go in and I sit down and the tension is thick. You can just feel it in the air. And he looks at me and it looks like they've been crying and he throws something at me and I catch it and I look down and he says, "What the hell is that?" And I say, "You threw it at me. I don't know." And I'm looking at it and it's this plastic tube. And he says, "It's speed. Where'd you get it?" And I dropped it. I was a good kid. I hadn't even tried pot at that point, let alone speed. So this terrified me. I said, "Where did I get it? You threw it at me." "I don't know." Now, to give them some fairness in the story, I had recently moved into the area and I was reinventing myself. I was listening to new music like the Grateful Dead and Fish. I was going out to coffee shops and I was out until 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock at night and came home twitching because I had so much coffee. Looking back as a parent, it's believable. And for the next 2 hours, he sat there yelling at me, interrogating me, telling me that I destroyed the family, that my ancestors were going to be disappointed. Never brought up the ancestors before. I knew it was serious. And finally, he grounded me. I was 19 at the time. I'm like, "Can you still ground a 19-year-old? How does that work?" And I went to my room and I was confused. It was like crazy making. I started thinking, did I like sleepwalking by this speed? Where did this come from? They'd found it in the driveway. So it's about 15 minutes later, and my mom walks into the room, and I'd heard the phone ring. And she said, "We just got a phone call from one of your dad's friends, and the amphetamines were his." And she turns around and she walks out. And I was vindicated, but I certainly wasn't satisfied after everything that I had gone through. So as I'm trying to fall to sleep, I start to hear a whisper fight happening in my parents' bedroom. And by fight, it was more of a lecture, and it was mostly my mom. I could hear her voice, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. But it was incredibly intense. And it finally stopped, and the door opened, and my father walked in, and he was looking down. And then he finally looks up, and he locks eyes with me. And though I know it took everything he had, he gave me satisfaction because he said, "I was wrong, and I'm sorry."